I just think somebody's waiting in the lobby. That could be our guest, Neil.
Okay, we are now live.
Are we okay to proceed, Neil?
Yeah, I can't see the lobby, unfortunately, so I'm struggling to allow who I presume is Ebony in. Oh no, she's there, she's in. So go ahead, Councillor, should be fine.
Thank you very much. Okay, good evening everyone. Welcome to a virtual meeting of the Residents' Education and Environmental Services Policy Overview Committee of the London Borough of Hillingdon. This virtual meeting is also being broadcast simultaneously on the Council's YouTube channel, Hillingdon London. My name is Councillor Bridges and I am the chairman of this meeting. The key role of this committee is to monitor the performance of local public services within its remit and to hold in-depth reviews on topics of resident interest. We engage with a range of external witnesses in our activity, which can include community groups, residents and subject matter experts. Where we identify areas for change or improvement, we make recommendations to the decision-making cabinet. For those present during the meeting and intending to speak, please note that you will be filmed and any statements you make will be recorded and made in public. So with that said, we've gone to online housekeeping. Please ensure your mobile phones are switched on silent or switched off. If wearing a headset, ensure the microphone is away from your mouth to avoid noise. Please keep microphones muted when not speaking and then unmute to speak. And only one person may speak at a time, and I as chairman will call those to speak. Before we move on to the agenda, I'd like to do a roll call of the councillors present this evening to confirm their attendance. Please indicate you are present when I say your name. The Vice Chairman, Councillor Morgan.
Good evening, I'm present.
Thank you very much. Councillor Vardia.
Good evening, Chairman, I'm present.
Thank you. Councillor Kaufman.
Good evening, Chairman, I'm present.
Councillor Chapman.
Good evening, Chairman. Yes, I'm present.
Councillor Rodriguez.
Good evening, Chairman. I'm present.
Thank you very much. Councillor Tubadar, who will be substituting for Councillor Sullivan. Okay. The opposition lead, Councillor Sweetin.
Good evening, Chairman. I'm present.
Good evening. Councillor Mavis.
Good evening, Chair. I'm present.
Thank you very much. And our co-opted member, Mr. Little.
Good evening, Chairman. I'm present and I've sorted the camera out.
Oh, good. Good evening to you, Mr. Little. Also, please can the officers present indicate that they are also in this meeting? Debbie Scarborough.
Good evening, Chairman. I'm present.
Good evening. James Roger.
Good evening, Chairman. I'm present. Good evening, Chairman. I'm present.
Good evening. Mandy Malhotra.
Good evening, Chairman. Good evening, Chairman.
Good evening. Julia Johnson. Julia Johnson.
Yeah. Good evening, Chairman. I'm present. Yeah. Good evening, Chairman. I'm present.
Andrew McLeod.
Hi there. Yes, I'm present.
Okay. And our Democratic Services Officer Neil Fraser. Democratic Services Officer Neil.
Yes, President Chairman, we're getting a fair bit of feedback. I'm not sure where that's coming from.
I'm hearing an echo too. If you forgive me for one moment, I'll put my headphones in and see if that has any improvements.
Thank you. Thank you.
Unfortunately, there'll just have to be an echo for the moment while I finish this and we'll move on. So in terms of technical meter control, if any councillor leaves the virtual meeting partway through for a period of time, example, a lost connection, I will continue the meeting unless we are not quorumed. Quorum is 5 councillors. Importantly, any councillor who does leave the meeting for a period of time, this will not be able to vote on that item they were not present on. Details of the business to be considered is shown on the agenda, copies of which are available on the YouTube underneath the broadcast. With that said, I move on to apologies for absence, please.
Yes, thanks, Councillor. We'd received apologies from Councillor Sullivan, as you mentioned earlier, with Councillor Tubadar present as substitute, but not sure where Councillor is, perhaps he's having some IT issues, so we'll go on that basis.
I did, but I've resolved them and I managed to join now.
Oh, excellent, you're here, Councillor. Sorry, I didn't see you pop in. Thank you.
Yeah, it was a couple of minutes late. I apologize for that, but it was due to IT issues.
Thank you very much. Before I move on, may I also take the opportunity to welcome our witnesses this evening who will be discussing and presenting on item 5. Good evening to you all. There are any declarations of interest in this meeting? Please declare it now. I can see no indications. Item 4 is to agree the minutes of the previous meeting, pages 1 to 6. Are there any comments or questions? Councillor Sweeting, did you indicate?
Yes, I did. Thank you very much, Chair. Should not the response which I received from you regarding the members' inquiry issue be included in the minutes? Because this highlights the issue of residents not having information on the number of members' inquiries their own councillors have submitted. So as per the questions that appear at council, when there is a response that comes back, this is included in the minutes. So would that response be relevant to be included in the minutes of this meeting?
Neil, did you indicate?
Yeah, thank you. I was just going to mention, it wouldn't go into the minutes of the previous meeting because obviously that's a record of what was discussed at that meeting. But the question was raised. So I don't know if the chairman wants to elaborate on however he got to, as one of his actions was to discuss the matter outside the meeting, and then obviously it can be included in the minutes for this meeting.
Thank you, Neil. Yes, as the Labour leader, Neil will know, I did discuss this matter with the Chief Whip, and it was felt that as these stats are shared with the Chief Whips of the relevant parties, it was felt unnecessary to share it further than necessary due to the time involved with officers collating this information, and also a potential risk of breach of compliance with GDPR with sensitive matters. So on that basis, I will, as I said, just provide that information that was provided by the Chief Whip, and that members should revert to their Chief Whips of the relevant parties. Are the minutes agreed apart from that? Thank you very much. We move on now to item 5, which is our witness session, a review of Hillingdon's adult and community learning services. A very good evening to Deborah, Jeanette, Ebony and Horia. Whenever you're ready, please give your presentation.
Thank you, Chair. As with the previous times that I've appeared at before this committee, my understanding was that if we submitted some statements prior to the meeting, that members really wanted to take the opportunity to answer questions. So by way of presentation, I thought what I'd do is just introduce the witnesses that I've brought to you today. The first is that I would like to go to is Ebony Gonzalez. Ebony is Ebony is a student with us and has been for the past couple of years. At the last meeting, it was suggested that we speak to that you guys can access a learner or two who have overcome various barriers in order to continue learning, and Ebony has certainly done that and is very happy to speak to you about her experience and answer any questions you might have. Likewise, it was also discussed that possibly a tutor would come in and discuss the issues that we'd had to overcome from their point of view. In the light of this, I felt that I wanted to take something that had been a real challenge to us, because that was definitely something that came across strongly from the committee last time. So I chose our area that deals with adults with learning difficulties and disabilities. As a result, I spoke to one of our long-term members of staff, Jeanette Powers, who has been a learning support assistant, which is sort of a teaching assistant, both as a sessional and is now has just joined as of January, just joined the service in a 0.5 established role, doing that role, this learning support for adults with learning difficulties, but is also a qualified tutor with a background in IT. So I thought she would make a good witness for you to speak to. And likewise, her manager, who runs the area for adults with learning difficulties and disabilities, as well as the learning support across the service. So I felt that by speaking to these three people, you would have a good cross-section of people that would kind of reflect what you'd asked me for. So we've submitted statements from everybody, and I would guess that probably the best way from your perspective is for people to ask questions of obviously myself or any of the witnesses, if that suits you.
Thank you very much, Deborah. Yes, happy to take questions from members now. I assume they've all read the reports and the information in the item. Are there any members wishing to ask questions? Councillor Kaufman.
Thank you, Chairman. I read this report. It is a very, very good report, and you've had a really, really hard year to provide the service that you do provide. I'm just making one point which might be useful or might not. Would it be possible to encourage the use of virtual learning by offering certification on completion of a course? This could be used by people, carers, when applying for a job in the future as a certificate of competence, and for people to feel they have achieved, thus building personal self-confidence, plus the ability to use IT, an essential tool for the future. This could be delivered in different levels, so opportunities could also be offered to young and older students who are being supported.
May I take that one? It's Debbie.
Thank you, Debbie.
Yeah, that's exactly what we're trying to do, actually. As of this academic year, from September, the government decided they were going to fund new qualifications in digital skills to do exactly what you've described. Unfortunately, for lots of different reasons, none of them were published at the time we began the term. So in September, what we did was we adapted the courses that we knew were coming. We wrote different courses that were much smaller, and we did introductory courses because we wanted to make sure, obviously digital skills are essential for a reason, and we wanted to make sure that we weren't waiting around for those qualifications, that we were just going ahead. So we came up with short 5-week intro courses, and those people that completed those had sort of everything from how to log on, how to access digital meetings and so on, some really practical things, and they have now moved into those qualification courses. But as well as that, there have been some areas that just weren't able to take those on as quickly, such as LDD. And so, but with in January, so sorry, let me just do one thing at a time. So we're in a position now where we're offering both. We're offering an intro course to people who maybe just need a bit of a refresher or are a bit nervous or uncertain of their own skills, and then we move them into the more qualification courses, the digital skills. In terms of ALDD, there was nothing really except to offer them in terms of courses that were sort of already written up, except very low level, this is how this works. And actually Jeanette's the best one to speak about this because this is her field. And the team worked really hard to try to get that group of learners used to the idea of blended learning and going online, because we knew there was likely to be another lockdown. And so, but as it turns out, with the updated funding rules that came in January, we're hoping to be able to put some of those shorter courses on that we will now be able to get funded for from Easter and certainly from September. So we should be able to do it for all learners soon.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Kaufman. I assume you have no follow-up? You're on mute. I assume that's a no. Councillor Stanton?
Thank you, Chairman. I was very much going to ask about the digital divide, but you've answered that, because it's not just going to qualifications, but often the bar for learning now is people being frightened of the screens that we're all confronted with this evening. And therefore it's seeing whether the service can expand on that but you've answered that very well. So can I come back to the other theme that's of concern, I think, to all of us, and that's the mental health of our residents, mental health of all of us. And I know that the service, can I first of all say, as I should have done at the beginning, you have done marvellous work before COVID, and you've done exceptional work through COVID, and I want to thank you and all of your staff for doing that. But if we could come back to the mental health issue, I know you undertake well-being courses, but is there any way of this being expanded so that mental health could be a new area of work for the service? I know that there's going to be support done by the council on this, by the NHS, by doctors, by other practitioners, but you have such a wonderful experience in supporting people of all ages, particularly the elderly, on wellness courses, that is it possible to expand the mental health issue so that we can mend our broken minds?
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. If I tell you that we have been building our mental health provision that we now call emotional health and well-being for some years now, following an externally funded project about 5 or 6 years ago. If I say that sort of in the last full year, the last pre-COVID year, we had 385 enrolments on our mental health provision. And then last year, where we lost the final term, we had 207. This year, it's gone down to 157. So we're really hoping to increase that again when we can start bringing people back into the centres after Easter, we hope. But what's been interesting is that the provision has sort of changed. The demand has changed throughout the lockdown period. Various things have happened. One is that when we went online, we also moved all of the mental health provision online. And for some people, that was a step too far. But what we found was in changing some of the processes that we had underpinning this. So, for instance, we ask everybody to fill in an optional sort of emotional health and wellbeing form. How am I feeling? To identify people that might struggle with that and to put support in place. When it went online, our response rate increased. And I think that was because they weren't sitting next to somebody in a classroom filling in a form and possibly being overlooked. So that was really interesting. We follow every person up with phone calls and we put in as much support as possible. But it's interesting because one of the things we're finding a lot of demand for is the course we've got there. All of these courses are quite short. Designed to go from one thing to another to gradually build people into perhaps bigger provision in something that isn't necessarily about mental health. And one of the things that's come through is a program we run called In Your Shoes, which is about helping parents support their children's mental health. And that has seen a significant rise. Unfortunately, I didn't think to bring the numbers with me, but what I'm hearing all the time from our team is exactly, this was really popular. And it seems to be that course is definitely at the top of the charts, which is really a sign of the times. In answer to building the programme up, actually, I'm glad you said it because that's exactly what we've just done. We had a tutor coordinator role as a 0.5 established post that was leading on this under the guidance of a manager. Recently, we had a sort of a mini shift around with because we had some vacancies, and we split childcare and health and social care because we wanted to put more resources into the mental health that sits in health and social care, and there wasn't time when it was combined for the one manager. And the person that actually was appointed that applied and got the job was the same tutor that had been running the mental health program. So she's now running that area and she's taking over counselling and wider health and social care. So we're very fortunate to have a really good team, and I'm really pleased that she was appointed. But that was 2-3 weeks ago.
Thank you very much. Councillor Sweeting, do you have a supplementary you wish to ask?
Yes, I do. It's about the ICT equipment. All is wonderful to be able to deliver courses, but we don't know how many will still be virtual and needing the IT hardware. Is there a capacity issue with your service on people having the necessary, laptops, iPads, etc.? And is there any way that a budget in some way could be set aside to expand the numbers that you are able to actually provide to people that have not got that digital piece of equipment?
So again, really good question. Thank you very much for suggesting some funding, but actually I think we're okay, because we had the opportunity to bid for 2 different funding pots throughout the several lockdown periods. Both of which were from the GLA. We actually managed to secure 50 Chromebooks, 50 Chromebooks. And what's delayed us is actually getting hold of them, because so many providers have been trying to get them. There's been a shortage of supply across the country, but we've just got them all in. We've set up a loan and learn scheme. And so learners apply to have one of these Chromebooks lent to them. And so far we've had, of our 50, we've had 38 allocated. But we only launched this in January, so that's pretty good going so far. And as word of mouth happens and people understand, then that will pick up. What we have found is that having sorted that, we've realised that what we need are dongles, because people then struggle to have access to the internet. And so we're trying to find ways within our funding, within our learning support budget, to buy dongles to then support those people that need that. So yeah, that's where we are with that.
Thank you very much. Neil, did you indicate? No, okay. Mr. Little, are you there? There you are. When you're ready, Mr. Little.
Thank you. Reading the report that was sent to us, there seems to be a problem with putting on courses with the people with learning difficulties, particularly those who are in care homes. Is this something where there needs to be training for the carers, or is it largely a technical problem with capacity of broadband and similar sorts of issues of equipment?
Well, I'm happy to answer that, but it might be nice to speak to somebody other than me from your perspective. I'm sure you'd appreciate that too. So if I can bring Thoria in, and then Thoria, if you need some more information or something, just let me know.
Okay. I will say what I think and what I've experienced, but I think also Jeanette might be able to add something to this. So I think there are a mix of issues. So one of the things we heard earlier this year in January was the Wi-Fi issue, no broadband. And in addition to that was the devices. So it's like the care homes, if they have Wi-Fi for their own work, they cannot share that with the learners. I'm not quite sure how it works. Also, there's the support. Maybe they don't have time to be with the learners, each of them, because it's quite demanding having to be with every single person separately, and they have to be in separate spaces as well. So they can't, I don't know what the space is like in a care home. So we've had those kind of issues as well. And just really the devices. A lot of our learners did not have devices, and quite a few of them have taken advantage of our learn and loan scheme, or loan and learn scheme. Yeah.
Jeanette, have you got anything to add to that?
Yeah, just from experience of actually dealing with the residential homes firsthand, of having to call them up and support them to get online. There's, as Thoria just said, there's been a number of issues, and it's not only devices, sometimes they don't have the connection, they don't have internet. Sometimes the home is working off of like an intranet and it's not accessible to the learners' rooms. Yeah, and if they have got devices, sometimes they don't have the right software or the right apps downloaded. So we've had to provide support to support the carers and residential home managers and parents to download the correct apps so that they can get online to complete the courses.
Thank you very much. Mr. Little, do you have a supplementary you wish to ask?
Not at the moment, Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor Morgan.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. First of all, I'd like to also voice my thanks to Debbie and everyone involved with the adult and community learning, especially over the past 12 months. It must be extremely stressful, and you know, you've done a fantastic job, so thank you very much for doing all this. On the reports, you know, I've listened to everything you've said. By the sounds of it, you know, you've got a hard job to start with. I mean, so before being a councillor, I used to teach people with computers, and yes, you know, even people of sort of like 30s and 40s are afraid, what happens if I press this button and the screen goes blank? Trying to tell people it doesn't matter, you can't break it. It's very, very difficult. So to be able to do that remotely is even harder. From everything you've said, is it just purely dongles that's the issue that you now have, or are there other things that you think, if only we could do this, or if only we could do that? Thank you.
If I can take that initially, and then I think probably Jeanette and Thoria, if that's okay.
Yes, of course.
For me, I would like to reach out to some of the parents as well as the care homes. I think that this is talking for LDD. I think that sometimes, as we spoke about early on in this conversation, that, and again just now, that fear of doing the wrong thing can also translate, and as a parent you sort of think you should know how to do this, and then if they can't, then it's, oh, this is too much trouble, and then actually that student, that learner doesn't get to join the class, which is such a shame. So that would be, for me, that would be my thing, and we're trying to figure out ways to involve them and try to do some family learning maybe or some, but we're trying to figure it out. I don't know that there's an easy answer. Jeanette, Thoria, what would you say to that?
I think that we just a general kind of public awareness of the need for digital skills would go a long way. And when I look at how the pandemic has progressed us in terms of digital skills since last year, I can see so much growth. Like, there's so much that's happened. There are things that we've been able to do and attitudes that you can see have changed over the course of the last few months that, you know, early in the pandemic, you would never have imagined that there are people who just would not have, you know, tried to join an online class, and now, you know, they're actually doing it week on week, they're joining. So it is happening. But I just think we need to push that. And I think with the things are moving all in the right direction, I think. So we've got these courses that have come up, the digital skills courses. People are now kind of softening to the idea of, you know, everything's going online anyway. So I have to kind of join that train, otherwise I'll get left behind. I won't be able to do anything. So I think just with time, things are changing. So I think, I don't know, I think we're heading in the right direction, I would say.
Yeah, I've basically everything Thoria said. We've definitely found that there's a lack of digital skills amongst parents and carers and care staff as well. So our support has enabled them to progress with those skills. So if that was enhanced for them, that would make a big difference. And sometimes, though, it's due to a lack of time. They don't have the time to spend to do it. And a lot of parents are also working, so they don't have the time to spend, or they're not even present to help, in our case, in the ALDD area, our learners to get online, because the majority of our learners all need support in order to access online learning. So, but the digital skills have definitely improved over the last few weeks, and we've supported them to all get online. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Mavis.
Thank you, Chair. I'd also like to pass on my congratulations to the service and all those involved. I'm very appreciative of the report, particularly Ebony's story and her journey in learning. My condolences for your loss, Ebony. I would be interested to find out a little bit more about the role in which the adult learning provision provided in supporting not just the learning but also the student support and the welfare, and actually what has been done during the pandemic and maybe before the pandemic to support students with their mental health and well-being.
Good evening. Thank you so much for this opportunity. My name is Ebony Gonzalez. I started over a year ago with the Learning Center, and I have 3 kids, as maybe you might know. It was a very hard situation. It still is during my life, but with Adult Learning Center, believe it or not, it's much easier for me because the support I got from Mr. Martin, Mr. Joe, even my teacher, Miss Minnie, it's like they're my family at this point of view, because I only live here with my children. I don't have family here. So I've been relying on them on questions and regard randomly, even out of school matter. So, and they will be able to help and support. So, and now that I got my laptop, it's much easier because I'm able to log in better, because I was using my phone most of the time. And they've been also encouraging me, even though I was a little bit low on classes. They give me a lot of support so I can continue, because my goal here is to let my children know that you can do it. I mean, even you have hard situation you have to battle in life. It's not just the COVID for me. It has also been the loss of my husband. And like I said, I'm very thankful for all the ones that are involved in my. It's like they give me, to have more confidence in myself to go on. So it has been very helpful.
Thank you very much for that, Ebony. Councillor Mavis, do you have a follow-up you wish to ask?
I suppose it would be useful to get an understanding of what, and thank you very much, Ebony. I really do appreciate your perspective. It does help and inform us. I suppose for the service managers, my question is, what are the future plans in terms of student support and maybe more broadly support for mental health resilience, maybe supporting people through learning in areas such as grief or other things that would help people through difficult times or challenging times?
Oh, that's a big question. If I tell you what we do, it would fundamentally, the support comes from a human perspective. If you take COVID out of it for a second, you just work with, if you just think about a regular person that comes into us, take Ebony or any of us, more often than not, what we see, mostly they tend to be women. What we see is a very clear underconfidence that comes through in most people. Oftentimes they have had very little experience of formal education, or what they've had has been fairly poor in terms of their own experience of it, not in terms of the quality, of course, I wouldn't know. But they come in with baggage and with this voice in their head saying, they're going to spot that I'm the fake, and they're going to see really that I shouldn't be here because I'm not as bright as anybody else, I'm not as clever as, all of these things that they carry. And actually what we see is somebody who has overcome all sorts of barriers to achieve all the things they have in their lives, and to and they're ambitious and brave enough and courageous enough to actually walk through those doors and ask, how do I get onto this class? Can I try this? So I think the first part of the support that we give is that very, very first contact, and just seeing the potential from the word go. We always start with, what do you want to achieve in 5 years' time? You know, what are you trying to aim for? What is it you want to get to? And then we go backwards towards where their starting point is, so that we know what they're trying to get to. And so that, I think, is fundamental to everything else that we do. Beyond that, we've got, if you just take, going back to the mental health team and that department, they take the time, they spend the time to check attendance. All of the managers do. They check attendance all the time, because that's often a sign that something's gone wrong or there's a problem. If you check attendance, follow up where there's a lack of attendance. Very often it can be something quite simple, you know, straightforward reason. But sometimes it's more, and if you get used to picking up on that, you can identify a problem that's running underneath it. So maybe it's just that the car broke down, or maybe it's that somebody didn't quite understand what was going on 2 classes ago, lost their confidence, didn't go in that next time, then they're worried about coming back. And so you can actually then encourage them back in. So fundamentally, it's just being a decent person, to be honest, and doing that again and again and again, when that's part of what you do every day. And the people that you see, you can see the potential in people, and what you're spotting is, what's the challenge you're trying to overcome. That's the thing that's common across the service, no matter what study you've got, whether you've got an identified mental health issue or not. In terms of moving the department forward, there are so many things we want to do. We definitely want to work more closely with other areas of the council. We're working hard to do that at the moment and building that up, because, for instance, care leavers will come with different issues and looked after children. And, you know, we want to work with, there's a group of people that come in and work with people with, not dementia, diabetes. And we want to work on that side of it, because in addressing those sort of what looks like a straightforward, this is the kind of food you need to eat for your diabetes, actually can bring in an awful lot of those mental health improvements, if you like. But there are so many things. I think perhaps what I probably need to do in terms of provision going forward is the next witness session is about that, and maybe I need to give you some examples of the sorts of things we're looking at, so that we don't take up all of the meeting, because I know you've got a full agenda. I don't know if that sort of answered your question at all, but I hope I've given you sort of a basic idea of where the approach we take.
Thank you. Before I go back to you, Councillor Mavis, Neil, I saw your hand raised. Do you wish to intervene?
Yeah, thank you. It wasn't intervening, it was just a follow-up question. So Debbie sort of covered a bit of it. My question was around interdepartmental working within the council and opportunities for, you know, leveraging some of the other departments that we have, because that might be something that the committee could make significant recommendations towards cabinet at the outcome of this review. You touched on it a bit. I don't know whether tonight is the most appropriate time to discuss it, but perhaps I just thought I'd just highlight it as an area of focus for perhaps future sessions, and you and I can discuss that afterwards, how we present that information to the committee. Thanks, that's all.
Great, very happy with that, thank you.
Thank you very much, Neil. Councillor Kaufman, you indicated.
Thank you, Chairman. I'd just like to know, obviously there's a raft of courses available for adult ed. What courses are requested but are not currently provided for whatever reason? Deborah.
Oh, yeah. Okay, you've got me with this one. I think sometimes people, if I'm honest with you, I think sometimes people want a course they want at the time they want it, in the way they want it, in the moment they want it, and we can't always do that. We have we have two sort of distinct areas that I think I've touched on before. We've got qualifications that are about effectively trying to improve people's economic prospects and just sense of self, really, and well-being, and trying to get them in a position that they can support their families, be a role model for their families, which is actually one of the drivers that I know Ebony mentioned to me, that she wants her children to see her studying and getting somewhere and going into a line of work that she wants to do, to encourage them to do the same. And that's something we see a lot. And many of us have had, I mean, I've been there, we've, you know, a lot of us had the same experience. The other type of course we do is sort of split into two. One is the personal development type course, which would be your languages or your art or your yoga, those courses. And we tend to get requests from those learners that they would want. One of the things that we've been asked for a lot, not a lot, but more often, is they've really not wanted to do online learning through the lockdown. They want to be back in centres. So now that we know we're reopening on the 8th, what I want to do is have LDD only back in from the 8th through till Easter, which is pretty much about 3 weeks. Then we'll have the Easter break. And then after that, in the summer term, we'll start to bring back those personal development courses into centres and start to build that up again, because there's been a distinct reluctance with that group in terms of online delivery, and there was no other way we could do it. So the numbers have dropped significantly, and it'd be good to build that back up again. Sometimes that, again, sticking with that group, if you think about a language, say you're studying French and you've done your beginners and you've worked your way through and now you're at advanced, and that's it. We can't go beyond advanced. That's as far as we go. And they would like to keep coming back because they get so much out of it. So what we tend to do is, when we get to the point where we've got some people and we're like, you know, we need to make room for the people coming through and working their way up again, and the next level needs to go into advanced and so on, we help them turn those into privately run clubs, and then we offer them accommodation, and they sort themselves out with their Spanish or French or whatever club. If they want to pay the tutor completely separately from us to teach them, they can. If they just want to make it a language maintenance and meet together, they can. But it means that we aren't using our public funding for it, but it does enable them to keep learning. So it's those sorts of things that we sort of look on as an individual basis. And then the other thing that we get for the rest of the community learning is the very targeted outreach. And in those instances, what we tend to find is we're trying to reach the people that wouldn't usually be involved and get them on that journey. We're quite successful. We do that quite successfully, but obviously, again, because it's out in the community, those courses have dropped off considerably this year. But what we can find is there are some groups then that will get used to having a particular class or a particular thing going in their community centre. It becomes, instead of being, this is really great and it's exciting and it's something new, it becomes a bit of, sometimes it can be seen as a bit of an entitlement, a bit of a right. And if we say, well, actually, you know, how about you try to improve your digital skills? What if we put something else on? Or what if we do, let's see if we can, you know, build up something else. There can be a bit of resistance to that. And so that's something that we do tend to struggle with. And we just have to kind of persuade and put boundaries around it, because the idea is that we reach them, you know, where it's easy for them to access, and it's not scary, and it's not a college, and it's not, but that we progress them. It's all about progression. It's not, we're not about having people get to one point and stay there. So sometimes we just have to say, I'm sorry, this isn't possible, but we can give you something else. So sometimes it can be tricky. People aren't always happy with the answers, but usually I do that. So that normally works its way up to me. So that would be the kind of thing that would be my answer to it. I mean, I'm sure if you spoke to all the managers, they'd all have different stories, but that would be my sort of top level answer.
Thank you. Councillor Kaufman, do you wish to add a supplementary, or are you happy with the answer provided?
I'm happy with the answer provided, and there's probably other people that want to speak also, Chairman.
There is indeed a list. Councillor Tubadar.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just would like to add my voice to other councillors' expression of thanks to the section for the fantastic service you have been providing during this challenging time. And I fully understand the many challenges around adult education for care home people, because the care homes are not just equipped with what is required for you guys to reach them, and our ability will not what is required is not something as simple as going in there and fixing it. People who have not had experience of using any IT equipment, which majority of our care home residents are probably like, are not going to be easily up and running with IT equipment you send them, never mind about the other restrictions which they're facing, which is lack of availability of network in the first place for them to get to the internet, so on and so forth. But from what I've heard, what I've seen in the report, you've done a fantastic job, and congratulations to you guys. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Tubadar. Mr. Little. You're on mute, Mr. Little.
Yes, I'm trying.
You got it.
Sorry about that. Returning to the subject of people with learning disabilities and learning difficulties, what proportion of your total pupil base do they constitute? And do you think you reach a sufficient proportion of them?
I can tell you the proportion, but I've got the details in the other room, so I can whiz back and give you that. I don't think we have reached enough. I think we do well. I mean, it's in the hundreds. We're not talking about sort of 50 people. It's a significant number of people. It's one of those questions. I mean, obviously our remit is post-19. So a 19-year-old young person doesn't really want to come to an adult education centre. If they're going to go into education after school, they want to go to a college. So for the first few years, that's where they tend to head, and I think that's the right decision. Then they come out of there and there's a bit of a void if they don't know that we're around. If they do, they tend to come and join us. And once they've found us once, they can be with us for many, many years. I mean, Jeanette has worked with the service for some time, and she would probably have quite a good take on this. But certainly we've had learners with us for a long time. And what we try to do is drive them always towards independence and challenge them. So it's not just about skills maintenance, although for some it is. It's also about trying different subjects. And we refreshed the programme a couple of years ago, which was, a bit of a shock for the group because they don't take well to change. But actually, they're doing more interesting things, and you can't just do the same courses all the time. So in terms of the service we give them, I think that's good. In terms of the reach, there's a significant increase in the number of young people with EHC plans, education, health and care plans across the borough. I don't think we're managing to reach that demand at all. Not just us, but I think jointly we're not, and that's something we need to look at. But those people, again, they grow up beyond the age of 25, so the EHC plan ceases, but the people continue. And what I would like to see are more opportunities. My take is that this group of youngsters tend to kind of get to the point where they're ready to go to work and they really are confident enough and skilled enough to manage when about 10 years later than those without learning difficulties. And so at the point that they're kind of 30s to mid 30s, they're really raring to go and there just aren't the work opportunity placements. So I think if we could somehow as a council increase the number of even unpaid work placements for adults with learning difficulties, it's not for everybody, not everybody can manage it. And we'd need to bring the staff with us and we'd need to train them, you know, to not be afraid, because it can be scary when you're faced with somebody with a learning difficulty and perhaps their communication isn't as good as you might expect, or maybe they've got some sort of physical disability that it can be a bit scary for people if they haven't come across that before. But that's what I'd like to see. In order to really make a difference, I think we need to open not just the educational doors, which are open if they can find us, if they know about us, but also opportunities for volunteering, opportunities for getting real life work experience, in the hope that their CVs can increase and can strengthen, and they become, they you know, ultimately could end up with a proper paid job, which would be the perfect solution for some people, not for everybody. But really, as I say, I'm sort of, again, this is my take on it. I think Jeanette is probably a good person to ask about this, because Jeanette's been on the front line working with these people for a long time, whereas I've been in the back office.
Can I just interject before Jeanette says something, Jeanette? I would say that probably about 10% of the students who learn with us declare a learning difficulty or disability. So we don't only just have our ALD curriculum, we also have learners with learning difficulties in mainstream classes as well. And so we try to identify them based on their disclosures from enrollment. So we identify them and then try to put in the support that they might need. A lot of people do know what interventions they need, what strategies work for them. It's really more for us to be aware of it so that we can support them, so that they can achieve whatever it is that they're doing with us. In terms of the learning, our learners, the adult learners with learning difficulties with special needs, I would say this year we've had, even with the lockdown and everything, we've had about 130 learners, and we've been able to get about 90 of them online just since January. So it is moving in the right direction. I think we are trying to identify and support as far as we are able to. Yeah, I think that's what I'd like to say. Jeanette, do you have anything you want to add?
I can only really speak from the point of view of actually working one-to-one with the learners. Having been with the service for nearly 11 years now, in a learning support role and a tutor role, I've seen quite a lot of learners do a lot of years service with us, and they will do lots of different courses over the years. And I think they feel comfortable learning with us. They're familiar, and it boosts the confidence. And it's an environment that they're used to. And as Debbie said, a lot of our learners are very much creatures of habit. They don't like change. So being within the service, it's familiar. Although they're doing lots of different courses, they know all the tutors, they know the staff, and that is a big part of it, because it's also, there is a social aspect, because they like to come and see people. They like to see their peers and mix with them, as well as the staff. So that's a really important side of it for our learners, because it also, especially if they're in care homes, it gets them out, you know, it gets them out in the community, and that's what they really enjoy, as well as the learning aspect. Thank you.
Mr. Little, do you have a follow-up you wish to ask?
Yes, to Deborah. She said that she'd like to find more volunteering and work placement type opportunities. Is that something you would like to develop from your own resources, or do you need other parts of the council to help you with that?
I think it would have to be other parts of the council as well. We're definitely developing them. We're working with, Thoria has recently been delivering some pre-employment workshops for this group and has done a great job doing it. And we've got some of them as stars. I'm thinking of a couple of people, 2-3 people in particular, who have really developed their digital skills to the point where we're starting to develop them. We're going to develop them. In fact, okay, try again. Thoria was running the workshops. 3 of them, I think, certainly 2, came through really strongly. Jeanette is now putting together a course and working with those guys to train them to be digital champions. And what we're hoping is that as each sort of new term starts, there'll be some of the people offering some support to their peers to help them get online and to remind them and so on, which will build their skills, their self-esteem, their work experience, even though they'll be doing it as volunteers. It runs in parallel with our service-wide volunteer group. We've got about 60 volunteers who act as digital champions, ESOL champions, and so on. So it runs in parallel with that. So definitely we're doing it internally, but we're only one service, and I think we know there's growing demand in the borough. I think if it was possible to get I mean, we do. I'm not saying the council, the civic centre itself does offer some work experience placements, so it's not like it's not happening. But I think if it were possible to work with the council and possibly some council partners out in the wider community that were employers that could offer more work experience placements, I think that would really enrich the lives of those people that were able to take advantage of that. It isn't for everybody, but for some, and particularly for that group that's sort of between 30 and 40, who really shouldn't be stuck with us. We should be supporting them, but they should be extending themselves and challenging themselves and doing that bit more. That would be fantastic. That would make such a difference.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. We have been on this item a while now, so I will take 2 more councillors who have indicated they wish to ask questions, which is Councillor Morgan and then Councillor Sweeting. And I'll finish this item by inviting Ebony to come in with some final remarks and perhaps any potential points she wishes to make. Councillor Morgan.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Debbie, you said you wanted to try and reach out to other departments to within the council to so we can reach further further to our residents. Have you looked, or are you already speaking with the likes of our libraries team? Because I know that they quite often do stuff out on Facebook and Twitter, and they quite often have authors who come on to and do a broadcast during the week. So I don't know, have you looked at that? Thank you.
Honestly, not recently. Through COVID, that's kind of gone by the wayside. We've got 2 of our centres are in libraries. So we do work quite closely with the offices in libraries. And we have a tradition of doing so in the same way as we've worked with children's centres and schools and so on. But because COVID sort of interrupted it all so much, it hasn't worked. That kind of thing has sort of gone by the wayside a little bit at the moment. But no, we definitely will be picking that up again and doing that.
Thank you. Councillor Morgan, do you wish to follow up? Are you happy with the answer? Okay, thank you. Councillor Sweeting?
Yes, thank you very much. I mean, we've seen that Ebony has become a courageous learner. She has stepped forward and she has completed a course and she's completing another course. But there are others that are bunkered down in houses and flats over these many, many months. So I'm just asking, is there any ways of extra ways of encouraging others to come forward who are not so courageous as Ebony?
I think it's a question of just of really moving forward with the work we were doing before COVID, if I'm honest. I think that we've changed over the past 3 years or so, we've been, maybe more, we've been really struggling to try to reach those hardest to reach learners. And we've just, during the last lockdown, we've had another sort of shuffle around. I mentioned one position earlier that we'd developed, and we've divided the work differently amongst some of the managers that we've got. So now we've got one person targeted, her job, and she's a very experienced tutor and manager, is to go out and reach those hardest to reach learners, because we were doing it prior to that sort of across the service, and everybody was trying to do some, and it just felt too disjointed. We needed a person, so she's now got the community development responsibility, and she's, you know, we've got a community partnership board. We work with something like about 20 or something members come to that are third sector, very small charities in some cases. But it's been a bit sort of one step forward, two steps back, because honestly, because of COVID, every time we get somewhere and we start to move, we've then been pushed down, you know, down back again. So it's been a bit frustrating. I think that we're on the right lines. I think that what we're doing is the right thing. I'm very happy to take suggestions, because obviously we come up with ideas all the time. But if any of you have any suggestions, great, bring them on. I think what we need is a bit of momentum we could just do with a bit of a break from COVID, so that we can get out there, reach those people, start to bring them in. It takes so long to get the whole momentum going. And then I think we'll start to see some real benefits of it as we move forward. You can see them in isolated situations. You can follow a group through to work with carers at home, who we do work with Hillingdon carers, and we've done that for some time. It's actually Karina, the manager I mentioned just now, that forged this partnership some years ago. But when COVID lockdown came, we talked to them about maybe putting something online, and now they love it. They're learning Spanish. They're in with this is not targeted outreach anymore. They've transitioned into a regular class with people that would normally come in for an evening class, and they get online. They have a break from their caring duties whilst their charge is doing whatever they're doing. They don't have to worry about respite care. They're absolutely loving it. And so it's happening, but I want that on a bigger scale. That's what we're after, but on a bigger scale. So, and I just can't wait for COVID to be over, really, just so we can get going again.
Thank you, Councillor Sweeting.
Well, amen to that. I think we all want COVID to be over well and truly. I'm just thinking about your perspectives, your booklet that's brought out each year. I mean, is there going to be some major changes to that because of the different ways of working? And maybe, you know, we can help you to feed into that. I expect it's all been thought out at the moment, or being developed at the moment, but it would be interesting to know your ideas on that document that goes out to us all.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, I'm very happy for suggestions. What we do with the brochure is we only put the standard classes that we would usually, I mean, you know, there's so much more online now, but that we'd usually be running in centres. So any of the targeted outreach, any of the emotional health and wellbeing, those particular classes, we talk about them in the brochure, but we don't tend to list them. We put a few of the emotional health and wellbeing in, but mainly just tasters, just to give people an idea, because what we try to do is put on bespoke courses for different community groups, and we need to be able to be very flexible with that provision. So if we produce the same thing that we do for languages, okay, on Thursday at 7 o'clock you're going to be studying German or whatever. If we did the same thing with emotional health and wellbeing, or with the targeted outreach, those groups would not see it as theirs. So what we do is we go and we talk to those people, and we look at their strategic aims, we marry them together with ours and we say, okay, how can we make this work? So about a third of our provision doesn't go anywhere near the brochure. So the brochure's sort of there for qualifications, people that are moving on. We don't put the details in about English, maths, ESOL classes because we need the flexibility, but we put a page or two in about we run them, this is what we're doing. And it's always a bit of a tension because, you know, we don't want to undersell ourselves, but at the same time, we don't want to tie ourselves down so much that we can't be responsive and flexible to when we see the demand out there. So we try to get a balance with the brochure, and we change it every year. We try and find ways to improve it. So, I mean, again, very happy for suggestions.
Thank you very much. I would like to finish this item now with yourself, Ebony. Ebony, as a learner, from your perspective, is there anything you feel could be improved, or is there any comments you wish to make based on what you've heard this evening? We would be really grateful for your input.
Thank you so much. Well, so far as Debbie was saying, it is very frustrated with the COVID-19 going on, but it is a great news knowing that we can maybe be back on the 8th and that we can all get together, share our emotions, because that is also part of what we're doing. It's not just going to class, but we also have the opportunity to speak to others, to let it go, because once you're in the house so long, and when especially me that have children, it is a little bit overwhelmed. So when you get to meet your friends and speak out and maybe do the class together, and those things will help mentally and also to improve in life, like my goal is, you know, because I want to teach my children that no matter what age it is, because I didn't do good in my childhood, now there's no too late to improve, you know, and to let them know that you can do, because you are the role model for your children. So whatever you do in life, they look up to you. So that's why I want to go on forward, no matter what's going on in the world, because it's actually something that's going on everywhere, that you still can push on. So, and then, like I said before, I have a lot of support of the, it's not just me. I know other students have support as well from the teacher or from the head office. And that will help, definitely, because I was going through, you know, up and down. And sometimes I didn't have the opportunity to get in touch because it takes time during the coronavirus. But I was able to speak with my teacher or speak to the head office, and they will give me support, even though they were not a specialist on counseling, but they were able to share some humanity towards me that has helped me to my way. So thank you. I will thank them, even though they're not available here, they're not here. But and also you guys for doing a tremendous job, because if it wasn't without you, maybe this would not happen. So thank you so much.
Thank you very much to you, Ebony, for attending this evening, and on behalf of the committee, the very best of luck to you for the future. We will ensure that a copy of the final reports, once this business has been concluded, will be sent to you just for your information, so you can see the work that's been done behind this. Thank you very much, and thank you to the officers for their presentations this evening on this item. We are going to move on to other business now, but you are free to leave the meeting as and when you wish. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Item 6 is the planning for canals and towpaths. We have James Roger and Mandy Malhotra. I understand James has got some photos to show us as well, so whenever you're ready, please go ahead with your presentation.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm going to present this item, but if there are any questions at the end, I'm sure Mandy will help me in answering them. So with regard to item 6, it's a kind of topical item because the canal towpaths in particular are being used an awful lot at the moment during COVID as a very important sort of recreational resource. and dare I say it, without trying to sort of try and do a seamless link to the previous item, obviously helping a lot of people's mental health and well-being in effect. But turning to the actual report, this report concerns basically the work we're doing as a planning department to both from a planning policy perspective, but actually what I will focus more on in terms of planning applications, securing canal improvements. We work closely with the Canal and Rivers Trust. They were founded in 2012, and they're a charity, and part of their principal role is safeguarding the waterways now and in the future. And they are very active, and that's both important and a positive thing, because they engage with us in terms of our plan making function and very actively engage on planning applications. In answer to a sort of possible question of, well, what applications do we consult them on? We don't just consult them on applications that go up to a canal edge. If there's a major housing development, if the boundary of that site is within 150 metres of a canal edge, we will consult them. So when I refer to a table in a minute that I'll very quickly talk you through, we are getting quite sizable financial contributions to the canal improvements, even from developments that don't actually abut a canal edge. And the thought process behind that is quite simply that a number of the residents in those housing developments will, if they're within 150 metres of a canal edge, are probably going to be using that canal as a sort of recreational resource, especially if there's a towpath that they can walk or cycle along. I'm going to go quite briefly through the planning policies. We've kind of given you, especially in the appendices, sort of perhaps almost more detail than you might wish. But effectively, the kind of headline point is that when it comes to canals, there is a raft of policies at London and local plan level. And the importance of that is if we want to, when there's new developments in the borough, secure improvements to the canals, there's a whole raft of policies to back that up. And when you go into the detail of them, which I'm not going to do because you've already, I'm sure you don't want to hear me all night talking about planning policies, there's a lot of detail within some of the policies that then enables us to kind of push developers sort of hard to invest in the canals, and those developments that do actually face a canal, that because we've got all these policies, we can quite heavily focus in our discussions with them to ensure that there's a sort of attractive interface between the development and the canal edge, that there's landscape planting, that there's cycle paths, and I will in a minute come to some photos to try and illustrate these points, because pictures often says 1,000 words, as they say. So on page 18 of your report, it refers to some recent examples where Section 106 is. So this is the legal agreements that accompany a planning application. So this is where we're getting money from a developer to invest in infrastructure. With Section 106, it relates to land either sort of very close to or kind of directly adjoining a development site. What the table shows is that with Hayes in particular, we really have been targeting all the big housing developments and either ensuring that their canal frontages for as sort of long a stretch as we can possibly negotiate are improved, or if I use Chaley Industrial Estate, to those familiar with that site, it does not have a canal frontage. It's got to be at least 50 metres away from the nearest canal edge, but that involves a sizable financial contribution, because knowing the geography of that site, if I were to live in that development, I'd probably be walking to the canal edge, to get some fresh air and have a walk or cycle. And the scale of some of the sites in terms of the canal improvements coming forward, many of them haven't yet started, but it's actually, it will have a major impact on Hayes and also West Drayton, because one of our priorities it is what there's a kind of vision to link Hayes and West Drayton such that you could walk or cycle between, you know, possibly one day go from one Crossrail station to the other on a bicycle or on foot, if you so wish to. But that table relates to work that an awful lot of project work, but mostly not, that's underway. So you actually have to go back about 3 years to developments we were approving in about 2017 for me to then to cross-reference something where I can show you a photograph. So I'm going to quickly go to some slides. So this is where hopefully the technology, which was working earlier, enables me to show you some slides. There's only 5 or 6 images, so hopefully you can see a kind of initial slide with today's date on it. So the first slide I have relates to a site called Waterloo Wharf in Uxbridge. This was a quite run-down piece of land, and although unfortunately the connections between this site and you can't do a sort of, it's not the easiest to do a long linear walk in effect, but where this development is I think positive is that it's absolutely transformed the appearance of this particular stretch of canal, and although if there's a disadvantage is that you can't, this particular bit of canal frontage doesn't interconnect particularly well. Hopefully this development would be a catalyst, and if any other land comes forward then it would all link up, as I envisage we will see in a few years' time in Hayes, where the extent of development that's come forward is effectively, you know, we're reaching the point where you can see the bits of canal improvements when they come forward, they will actually interlink with each other. So turning to Hayes, this is the Nestles factory site. Now this is a CGI, but what this is basically trying to illustrate the point here is that it is a very long stretch of canal you can see in that slide that would be, which at the present there is no public access to, that there would be public access to, that effectively people would be able to walk along and enjoy the canal frontage in effect. This is a real photo. Sorry, I do have to jump between reality and CGIs. So this is in front of Stockley Park Phase 3. And this is a long bit of canal frontage that's very recently been transformed. So that is not a CGI, that is actually 2 people look like they're running along this particular bit of canal edge. They're probably running because that's about halfway between the centre of Hayes and West Drayton, so you probably need to run about 1 kilometre to actually get to that point, if my geography is correct. This is a further photo, so I can actually sort of stitched, because it's quite a long bit of frontage there, it's you know, you're talking hundreds and hundreds of meters, I can actually stitch together photos to show the canal improvements. And on that particular site, it's not just a sort of narrow bit of canal frontage, there's a sort of like a linear path that runs along the side of the new path. Now this one is actually a CGI. This is the final one. So what we've now got at Stockley Park is there was a further development that came through that we as officers know as the GSK site, and that will interconnect with the Phase 3 site. So there's bits of jigsaw starting to come together. So on that point, I will stop presenting, and I and Mandip are happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, James. I invite questions from members. Councillor Kaufman.
Thank you, Chairman, and thanks for the presentation, James. Given the importance of the waterway infrastructure for leisure, tourism, biodiversity, and also freight traffic, can you tell me if freight traffic has increased over the last decade? And secondly, what plans are in place to make more use of the network for freight movement by water to take lorries off of the highway. I hope that's relevant, James.
Wow. I'm actually looking at Julia Johnson, our local plan manager, slightly apprehensively, in terms of whether we have any local plan data that might help answer that question.
I would be aware of it if we had anything, and I'm not at the moment. We do have policies that actively encourage it, both locally and in the new London plan that's coming forward next week. And I know you can secure it through Section 106, can be used sometimes on construction materials for sites adjacent to canals. So that does get used, that they transfer some material to site or take waste away by boat. But I am not aware of us having used that in the borough as yet. So, but we could ask the Canals and River Trust. I suspect if they hold any data. If that would be
It would just be interesting to find that information out, because, you know, going forward, I mean, the canals are being sort of widened, they're being dredged, they're, you know, being used properly. I can't see any reason why sort of freight can't be moved, you know, from one place to another. Otherwise, we've got all this infrastructure, all this network of waterways that we could use for that from an environmental point of view. So if there's any data on that, and moreoverly, what's the plan for the future for the network for freight movement? That's more important really than going backwards. So if that could be sort of imparted to us, that would be interesting.
I think just touching on what Julie Johnson has said, the London plan and our own policies and the Canals and River Trust do encourage it. It's not taken up very frequently at the stage at which planning applications are submitted. Whether we could ask the Canals and River Trust to push it more when developments are about to start or when they're further progressed. Obviously, lots of developments come through and are approved and sold on to third parties. So it's definitely something to investigate. But there is always a conflict between that commercial operation and then the Canals and Rivers Trust in terms of making better use of the waterways for public enhancements and leisure. Yeah, so there's a balance to be struck, I think, between the two, but it's worth investigating.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. Councillor Sweeting.
Thank you very much, Chair. Can I first of all thank the officers for this excellent report? It's a very interesting report. I would like to ask about the changes in planning policy that are like a tsunami coming our way, and some of the tsunami has already reached us. Is this likely to have implications for Section 106 and SIL money? Because all of these changes, these better development of the canal system, the towpaths, etc., is only possible because the funding is there. So are we likely to have some difficulty in future in getting the sorts of money coming in that we've had in the past?
I don't think there's necessarily a threat from planning policies per se, because there's lots of policies that support the Blue Ribbon Network, which is a term used for the canals. The problem we have is when you have what we call prior approval developments, because they're the ones we can't secure all the public benefits on. So whenever there's been sort of planning, sort of consultations on planning reforms that have gone to Cabinet or full council, one theme of those is that this council, both officers and sort of councillors, have kind of been a bit critical of anything that's expanding the prior approval regime, because it kind of curtails our ability. So to give an example, if there's an office that happens to have a canal frontage and they can convert it to flats, we're limited in what we can do as part of the planning process. So that development, there's actually one I know of in Hayes that's a horrendous lost opportunity because they haven't enhanced the canal frontage. So we've got two big announcements. Then they will bump into, before they reach the centre of Hayes, a small prior approval site that does not have canal frontage that's improved, and that legacy comes from the fact that that wasn't subject to full planning application, that particular proposal. So I may have digressed slightly, but I don't see any sort of threats in terms of, you know, the new London plan that's about to be adopted has strong policies that support canals. It's whenever there's sort of legislation that expands the amount of prior approvals, that's where the threat lies, if you were to ask my opinion.
But the legislation has expanded the prior approvals. I mean, there's going to be more possibility of, you know, office blocks and others being developed without the need for.
It's probably less of a threat to. So in terms of, if you look at all the examples in the table in the report, these are all massive development sites that they weren't ever in a situation where they could have sort of utilised prior approvals. So yeah, I wouldn't want to overstate the issue in effect.
Councillor Mavis.
Thank you, Chair, very much. I just credit to you all, really, who have been involved in the planning processes and upgrading the paths. As a jogger myself, it's so much better running down the canal without having to fall over all sorts of different things. You can tell the difference, though, as James was just describing, between the areas improved and those that aren't. And I was going to follow on from Councillor Sweeting's question, but I have another angle, really. So this is a great example where the council is in partnership with, you know, the trust, and are improving and supporting the upkeep of towpaths and the canals generally. And I wonder, is there a way of taking this great model of working and expanding that practice towards other waterways? So I'm particularly thinking of like the River Colne and that sort of area. I know that's a long way from housing sometimes, but is there scope to maybe extend the meterage so that those areas can be equally maintained and regenerated through the planning process? Because this partnership working is such a good example, and I know that it comes with funding, that if there was a way to do the same for other waterways, it would have a particularly positive impact on residents in those areas.
I'd love to give a positive answer to that, but the kind of mission and ethos that the Canals and Rivers Trust has is very different from that of the Environment Agency. So if it was in my gift to completely restructure the Environment Agency and to then engage with them, then yes, it would be great to do sort of some of the things I feel that we're achieving on canals with river frontages, but I'd be kind of misleading the committee if I were to be overly optimistic. But I have perhaps in answering the question flagged where the problem lies.
Councillor Mavis, do you wish to follow up, or are you happy?
No, if I would, I really appreciate that honesty, really do, and I fully understand it. I think all West Drayton councillors particularly feel that. So that's really helpful in that you know you can see the good working. I suppose, is there a way of working with other departments at least to represent that to the Environment Agency?
Yeah. So I perhaps started with a slightly negative. So we're
that's
actively, we are at the moment, how can I put it, stepping up our engagement with the Environment Agency, both because I don't want to digress into other matters that aren't the particular topic tonight, but across the board we're stepping up our engagement with the Environment Agency. So your point's a good point, and it's one for me to reflect on, because I'm involved with the officers that are stepping up with the engagement with the Environment Agency on other fronts.
Thank you. Councillor Chapman.
Did you say me?
Thank you, Chairman. And thank you, James. very pleased to see the photographs of Stockley Park and GSK. I used to work for GSK actually, and indeed another company down there, and I can assure you that 5 years ago it didn't look like that, that's for sure. I was going to sort of basically say, is the vision that we have a linear park? But I suppose that obviously is the case. And then I was going to ask about these gaps that appear because of prior approval, but I think you've already answered that as well. Just on a technical question, very precise technical question, you've mentioned this sort of threshold of 150 metres. I was wondering, 150 metres from the canal, that is to say that they have to pay in. Is that a Hillingdon figure? Is it a London Plan figure? Is it a national figure? Could it be changed, basically?
I'm going to pass to Mandip to see if she knows the answer to that question, because I'm, if that's okay.
You're going to be disappointed when I'm going to say I don't, but we can look into that, Councillor Chapman.
Much appreciated. You can tell me tomorrow night when we do our marathon session tomorrow, if you like, James.
Okay. Thank you, Neil. If you could just liaise with the officers outside of the meeting and perhaps come back to the next one for the minutes purposes. Councillor Kaufman, did you indicate?
Chairman. Just as an aside, you've shown these lovely pictures of the regeneration of the canal paths. Of late, I've noticed on Facebook a massive group of litter pickers that are going along the canal path, and the amount of stuff that they're picking up. Is this the responsibility of us, the council, or is this the responsibility of the Environment Agency? Because this includes fly tipping, all sorts of stuff. And I just wondered who was responsible for this, and whether or not it's just the volunteers out of their good heart that are doing it.
Often the land ownership is actually the Canal and Rivers Trust themselves, the canal edge. Sometimes it's developers, so a lot of the time it won't actually be us as a council. So I don't know if that's partly answering your question.
It is more often than not the Canals and River Trust for the towpath area, so it would be the charity organising volunteers to do those litter picks.
Thank you very much.
Again, Neil, maybe we can get contacts for this trust to perhaps distribute to councillors just for their information if they wish to make contact directly on any service requests, etc. Councillor Calvin, do you wish to follow up, or are you happy with that?
Happy with that, Chairman, thank you.
Okay. I cannot see any other people indicating apart from Councillor Morgan. Is there anyone else before I move on after him? Nope. Okay, Councillor Morgan, would you like to finish off, please?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, officers, for such a detailed report. As James is aware, that I used to live on one of the rivers that's mentioned in the appendices. And I just want to confirm that any building works that take place on any of the floodplains that the Canals and Rivers Trust are heavily involved in, what can or cannot be done, and what safeguards we've got on those pieces of land. But also to confirm that the Hillingdon litter pickers, as I think they call themselves, they're not a charity. They're just purely a group of residents that go around clearing up the litter for the benefit of everyone. So thank you.
Thank you very much. And thank you to the officers for their presentation. Sorry, Neil, are you indicating?
Yeah, no, Councillor Morgan did ask a question there. I wonder if we could have the answer.
Sorry, I didn't. Okay.
So within 8 metres of the Environment Agency, there is kind of controls they have within 8 metres of a edge of a river in effect, so the riverbank area. But their priority is more a protection rather than enhancement, if that makes sense. So whereas I think Councillor Chapman, if I remember rightly, was sort of alluding to the enhancement work that we've been achieving to the canals, the Environment Agency, certainly, you know, they've done a lot of protective work, but it's not, that's more their focus in terms of protecting floodplains, protecting the ecology of the rivers, rather than what I'd call more proactive enhancement work.
And just to add to that, so any applications we do receive on functional floodplains or other Environment Agency defined flood zones would also be consulted on with the Environment Agency as opposed to the Canals and River Trust, unless it was obviously a development on the canal towpath, which would not be acceptable. Hopefully that helps, Councillor Morgan.
Councillor Morgan, do you wish to add anything? You happy? Okay. Thank you very much. We now move on to item 7, which is the Community Infrastructure Levy. Again, we come back to James, Julia, and Andrew.
So this is one where I'm going to sort of try presenting again, Chairman, but will be helped when it comes to questions, but by my colleagues. I was involved in a report about a year ago to the POC, and one of the sort of comments made at that time, that report did actually relate to our infrastructure funding statement for 2018-2019, and sort of if I may sort of slightly paraphrase, one of the comments was that there was wasn't a lot of detail in the funding statement, if I may perhaps heavily paraphrase. So what this agenda item does is it has a report that basically is accompanying this year's funding statement, which has expanded from, although length obviously isn't everything, it's expanded from about 4 pages to 23 pages. This year's funding statement, there's a lot more detail in it, is the initial point I would make. The funding statement covers the period of the 1st of April 2019 to the 31st of March 2020. So I must stress that everything we're kind of referring to relates to a particular time frame. So if, for instance, there's something that was subject to seal collection a couple of months ago, then that's not going to be referenced in this report because it's only dealing with a particular reporting period. So what the POC report does is it kind of sets out in a bit more detail than dare I say we did a year ago, the kind of how we are reporting SIL, and if I sort of talk through the report a bit, on the second page there's a table of SIL income, and it's important to note there that the figures are sort of going up over time, so we are collecting more SIL. The reason it sort of starts suddenly in 2015-2016 is because the council only introduced its SIL charge towards the end of 2014, so that's why there wasn't a collection before then. But I think it's important to note that the way we kind of collect SIL is slightly different from section 106. So SIL is, in some ways, it's like a tax almost of development proposals, whereas section 106, the main difference in sort of plain English is section 106 is something that's site specific. So a brilliant example is if it's right next to a canal, then you'd look at section 106 because the development, you'd want it to engage properly with the canal edge, whereas the same housing development, the community infrastructure levy could be to improve schools that could be miles away from the site, but those schools could be impacted upon the development. In fact, with schools, it gets even more complicated because the impact on one school can create a domino effect on another school. So, and then in terms of the legislative requirements regarding SIL spend, it's important to note there's what's called strategic SIL. So that's 80% of the receipts, a maximum are spent on basically big projects. And then under the legislation, a minimum of 15% is to be spent on what's called neighbourhood SIL. And we do that in Hillingdon through the Chrysalis programme, which actually works perfectly in terms of how it complies with the SIL legislation, because all the Chrysalis projects are basically neighbourhood projects in effect. And also at the moment the amount that's spent through the Chrysalis projects is slightly more than 15% of our SIL receipts. So at some point in the future we might have an issue that there's so much money coming in through SIL that it doesn't quite tally with Chrysalis, but that's not an issue at the moment. Another important point to note is that we have something called a Regulation 123 list. So this actually sets out what this council spends its SIL money on, and this is really important because we're only basically allowed to spend our SIL money on things that are covered by the Regulation 123 list. That said, some of the titles are slightly broad, and if you were to ask me if there's any small print explaining what, for instance, a healthcare facility is, no, there isn't any, and that's partly because we don't really want to tie ourselves up in knots. Just quickly, it's education, transport improvements, healthcare facilities, community care facilities, library services, leisure facilities, open space provision, and community facilities. And there are various tests in terms of that underlie the Reg 123 list in terms of how you spend the SIL money that's collected during the year. So I'm not going to read through all the report. I'm going to, because it's quite a long report, but through the report there are various tables that set out how much has been collected, the admin amount. So we've actually spent 20% on neighbourhood projects, so that's more than the minimum 15%. That's set out on page 41, and then on page 42 is for the monitoring period the spend on strategic projects. So what's important to note here, I think, is that if you look at each year, there's normally a different school shown in the SIL spend. So it happens for that period that council was heavily investing in the construction of Viners Secondary School expansion. So but if you were to look over a much longer time scale, you'd start to see, in particular in education, a kind of a sort of spread that would cover a wider geographic area than obviously just a single school. Transport is slightly difficult because it gets spent on so many projects. You'd end up with as a giant Excel spreadsheet if we were to show you all the highway structural works. But to explain what the three subheadings are, highway structural works is, put simply, that's your road improvements, your pavements, your roads. Street lighting is street lighting, and then car park improvements is effectively the third one. But there was only one example during the spend period, which was Pembroke Gardens car park resurfacing. And then in terms of well, I won't talk through all of the spend, but but what I would explain is in terms of New Useley Leisure Centre, that's in some ways the odd one out, because the rest of these are actual physical build. Now, members, I'm sure we're aware that council hasn't started building the leisure centre yet. If I can explain what is a bit of small print, you can spend up to 10% of the value of a project on effectively, put simply, the project management, the paperwork, the kind of, the spend is not the actual build in effect. So that is legitimate spend towards what will ultimately be a massive infrastructure project in the sort of usually West Drayton area. And so in effect, so long as that project costs more than £4.7 million to build, and I'm pretty sure it will do, in fact I'm aware it definitely will, unless somebody knows something I don't know, then that explains why that's an acceptable spend. And so yeah, so the table sort of lists out, and then we've tried to, where possible, we haven't given a long description of each project, but most of them, there should be enough info that members can kind of work out, geographically where the location of the particular spend. And then from the second part, if I may call it that, of the report that goes through the neighbourhood spend, goes into a bit more detail of some of the smaller projects, which is the minimum 15%, but in actual case is actually equivalent to 20% during the monitoring period. And then attached to the actual report is the actual infrastructure funding statement, and this is on our web pages because there's a requirement that we have to publish this each year, and a number of the tables in this report are actually in the statement, are actually in the report, but the actual statement itself goes into even more detail, and it explains the allocations process, and it also kind of gives lots of sort of tables and breakdown in terms of the projects themselves. I'm conscious there will be questions, so I'm not going to talk any longer so that I don't take up all your night doing a presentation so you run out of time for actually asking me any questions, because I'm sure there will be questions. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. I invite members. Councillor Sweeten.
Thank you very much. Can I first of all thank the officers? I'm getting a feedback here, sorry about that. Can I thank the officers for this report, because it provides such a lot more detailed information than we had last year. I know that we did ask for SIL monies by ward, and that's not possible. But would it not be possible to provide SIL money by sites? It says that it is, and that would give a little bit more information on that. I know that when we had this report last time, it seemed to suggest that would be possible. It would be more difficult to provide information on spend, but not difficult to provide information by site. I know that you've provided the SIL monies coming from 2 sites in West Drayton, and that was very, very useful. So is it possible in the next report to have the SIL monies by site?
Yes, there's a kind of quite simple answer to that question. In terms of the way we structured the report was actually largely dictated by ICT, insofar as it kind of had quite a major impact on how we ended up presenting things. And one of the things we're doing is we are actually upgrading the ICT at the moment. So without going into too much sort of complex council bureaucracy, the council's ICT board has agreed in principle that we get some additional software called Exacom, and then once we have that software installed, it doesn't mean on day one we can suddenly we then need to transfer stuff from the back office and ensure all new development, the data is inputted into Exacom. But the advantage of this particular bit of software is it means that we can actually write a report that's sort of showing what we want to show, rather than the ICT dictating the format of the report. I don't know if that answers your question. So yes, so in a year's time we will have hopefully evolved further, basically. So we've evolved from, I was keen to point out 4 has become 23 pages. I'm not saying we're going to jump to 66 pages or overwhelm you, but we will, I anticipate when we're doing this next time, the ICT will enable us to kind of develop something that perhaps slightly better meets councillors' aspirations of how we would format the report, if I may leave it at that.
Councillor Sweeten, just to add anything?
Yes, thank you very much for that. I was just wondering about the consultation about the communities funds. I know that a lot of areas of the borough have got residents associations that are able to feed in their wishes to the council, but there are other areas that have not got those organisations. I know they have their councillors, but it is also very good to try to get as many views from residents as possible. So, I mean, how does the council consult those areas that haven't got residents associations? Do they do it just primarily through councillors?
I don't know, Julia, do you want to sort of answer? Because it's slightly more to do with Chrysalis, I think.
Yes. I don't have detailed knowledge about Chrysalis, but yeah, I understand that anyone can submit a project through Chrysalis. It doesn't need to be residents associations, it can be individuals or other groups, and obviously councillors as well. So that seemed to be the sort of the most accessible way of projects coming forward from the community. But that's, yeah, I understand how it comes forward.
I know that this is not a question, but it's not the Useley Leisure Centre because it's actually in West Drayton. I keep seeing Useley and I keep thinking it's the old swimming pool site, and of course it's not. So I don't know whether that can be altered to either West Drayton and Useley or just West Drayton, because it's going to be in West Drayton and not in Useley.
Well, we've actually published the statement, so yeah, it's probably a bit. We can't really change it now. I suspect that there's going to be a big debate in the future about what the actual leisure centre is called. But hopefully I won't be involved in that, because I'm not sure it falls under my remit.
Thank you very much. Just touching on the Chrysalis programme point, actually, it is very widely advertised in Hillingdon People and also the localised Hillingdon Peoples in the wards themselves. And it's also a very good part on their website covering Chrysalis. So I think it is widely advertised, but if there's opportunity to do more, then perhaps we should look at that. Councillor Mavers, I had you down. Did you indicate?
Thank you, Chair. On page 60 of the report, our report, but in the report, it highlights a single parking management scheme that's been funded by SIL. And I just wondered, is it standard practice to fund parking management schemes through SIL, or is that a future practice that will be adopted?
So that particular bit relates to Section 106 allocations. So, which I think is basically the answer to the question, because so parking management schemes are something that normally is to address a localized impact from a development proposal. So they're normally through 106. But page 60 on my agenda, that's the bit entitled Section 106 allocations. Sorry, it's my fault. I probably should have mentioned that the infrastructure funding statement, we have included some data on Section 106 as well. So my apologies, I should have mentioned that earlier, so that no one got caught out.
Councillor Mavers, do you wish to add anything?
Yeah, so thank you. Yes, I completely missed the headline that says that, sorry. But it does, for me, so there would be no objection to parking management schemes in theory being spent on being funded by SIL in the future if that money is available. But there's no legal reason why it couldn't be.
Me to do that one.
Okay.
So if it was the strategic portion of SIL, that has to be spent on physical infrastructure works or the maintenance of sort of community infrastructure. So, but the neighbourhood SIL is much more wide. It can be anything to do with the impact of development on an area, and parking management schemes, if one arose because of new development had gone in an area and caused parking stress, then residents could ask for neighbourhood SIL towards that. I think it would be harder to legally justify the strategic side, just because that's more targeted at sort of physical works.
Thank you very much. Are there any other members wishing to ask any questions? I'm looking around the screen. I can't see any. Okay. Thank you very much. And thank you, James and the officers, for your attendance. We move now on to item 8, which is the Cabinet Forward Plan, pages 71 to 76. Any comments or questions? Councillor Mavers.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just a little concerned that some of the new items haven't been allocated to scrutiny committees, particularly the Climate Change Action Plan. It would have been my hope that this came to the committee before going to Cabinet so that we could feed in, whereas now we may only get the opportunity to do this retrospectively, which means the plan would already be in place, assuming it was adopted by Cabinet, rather than having the opportunity for it to be scrutinised in another public forum or in a council forum. So my only ask, particularly with Climate Change Action Plan, it would be this meeting that we would look at it if it was in advance. But if in future years we could see that in advance, and that actually it could be added maybe to something we see as an information report or something we can contribute to after it's gone to Cabinet. But I am personally disappointed it hasn't come to the POC and been allocated to the POC beforehand, before being agreed by Cabinet.
Thank you, Neil. Would you be able to liaise with your colleagues outside, perhaps with Cabinet, and see why this wasn't brought to the committee and find out if we can do it again in future? Thank you. Councillor Sweeting.
Thank you very much. I was just wondering, normally the Cabinet plan puts which policy committee is responsible for the items on the plan, and the only policy committee that's mentioned is ours, which relates to the standards and quality in education. So I don't know whether this is all to do with some changes that might be being made at the beginning of the new council year, or another reason.
Neil, did you wish to say anything on that?
Yeah, I'll note that. I'm not responsible for actually drafting the forward plan, so I'll have to find out what's going on there, and hopefully I can come back to you. Okay.
I did see Dan Kennedy's hand raised. I wasn't sure if it was relating to Councillor Mavers' question or Councillor Sweeting, but Dan, did you wish to come in on this?
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. It was just in response to the Climate Action Plan item, and I just wanted to reassure committee members that the intention of the Climate Plan is to present really an outlined strategy, but then to undertake a period of consultation, and then bring back the final plan to Cabinet later on in the summer. So that, in other words, what we're seeking permission for Cabinet is permission to consult, so that we can engage fully with the community and obviously this POC to inform the final plan before it's presented back to Cabinet.
Thank you for clarifying, Dan. Are there any other members wishing to ask questions on this? If not, we shall note them. No. Okay. Our last item is the work programme on pages 77 to 80. Are there any questions or comments? Councillor Sweeting.
Yes, there's a few. The rivers and flooding update, which is coming to our meeting in April, because of the flooding which has happened in various parts of the borough, and particularly West Drayton, unfortunately. Could that item be brought forward? Because I know that there's been some pressure on the Environment Agency by council officers, and certainly by us as councillors as well. And it would be interesting to see how far we've got on actually the agency undertaking the work to clear up our rivers and other issues. I would also ask that a report on the new planning laws comes to us as a one-off, because that's going to have significant implications for us as councillors when we have residents coming to us over various planning issues. And maybe it's something that once the report is brought to us, that could go to all of the councillors, not just the councillors of this park.
Thank you, Councillor Sweeting. Look, going on to the work programme, I do know that March is quite a busy schedule. If it is available to do so with the officer's time, perhaps we could replace the tree planting update with the rivers and flooding if you wish for that to be prioritised, and we can push the tree planting back to April. I'll ask for some guidance from Neil on that, whether that's possible or not. Perhaps you can liaise with the officers outside of the meeting, and if that is doable, we can just swap those around.
Yeah, that was my thoughts, Councillor. Sorry. Obviously, everything is to be taken away and looked at with officers as to their availability and when it's suitable for items to come through. I recall that wasn't April originally chosen for the flooding because it was a key time post-flooding issues to reflect on issues. Is that not why we put it on April in the first place?
I must admit I can't remember that, but because we've had major flooding in October and major flooding last month, and we've got residents that are had to be pulled out of their residences and put into support residences by this council. It is an issue with many areas of the borough, and particularly West Drayton. So I'm declaring an interest here.
Well, I'll certainly look into it, councillors, and Councillor Sweeting in particular. Obviously, I can't make any promises because it is dependent on officer availability and resource.
Yes, no, absolutely. So yes, we can look to change that, Councillor Sweeting, subject to the officers' availability. And in regards to Councillor Sweeting's suggestion about planning, there, if we could look at the work programme later on and see if that can be added as well, if the committee is happy to do so, of course. I can't see any disagreements, so I assume that's fine. Any other points on the forward pan? Councillor Mavers, sorry.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, just two questions really. One is, when can we expect the early years provision update? I know that for a while I've been requesting that there be an update, as there's been several restructures in the last few years, and I know there's one currently at the moment, and for me it's an important area to look at, with hopefully a non-COVID world sooner rather than later. And the other one was, with the report for the youth services, there are two aspects to youth services covered by slightly different departments, and I know the universal youth offer comes under ourselves, but I may have mentioned in the past that I'd be keen to also see how the targeted youth service interacts and engages. And I know that the targeted youth service potentially sits under children's services. I'm not sure how that works in terms of committees, but it would be useful to at least get the relationship between the two if we can't get reports on both aspects of youth services or services for young people.
Yeah, sorry, Chairman. In terms of the youth services, I'll liaise with the relevant officers and determine how we best fulfil that request. In relation to the early years, I would defer to the Chairman on that.
Thank you. So the officers have requested a deferment on that because it's still under review at present. So we don't have a date for when that will come back, but I have been requesting that as soon as possible. So as soon as I have any further information, I will liaise with members of this committee. But rest assured, as and when that's available, it will be brought to this committee. Any other questions or comments? Nope. In which case, ladies and gentlemen, that concludes our business for this evening. I thank you for your attendance this evening. Stay safe and see you all very soon. Good night.
Good night. Thank you.
Good night.
Good night, all.
Thank you very much, everybody. Have a good evening.
Good evening, all, and thank you.